Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. As usual, I'm your co-host Steve Wirt, and I'm joined by.
I'm Tim Hannon.
All right, and today we're going to talk about a guy who was his own one-man Italian army. That would be, of course, Franco Harris. He's one of the most beloved Steeler players to ever play. And he's also only one of three players to ever have his number retired. Tim, can you name the other two? It's not that hard.
Yeah, it's Joe Green, number 75, and it's Ernie Stautner's number 70.
There you go. That's it. That's the list. That's the only three numbers you can not wear. So, if you wonder why Pat Fryermuth is wearing, Lynn Swann's number, or why I actually had this with a person at work yesterday. It was like, oh, number 39, Darren Perry. That's awesome. And the guy was like, it was a Minka Fitzpatrick jersey, but it was like, and I forgot Willie Parker wore that too.
Oh,
yeah. So the Steelers are kind of weird like that. They don't really, they let, like, remember Deshae Townsend wore 26 and so did Rod Woodson.
And Le'Veon Bell.
Yeah. So it's kind of weird like that. He's a legend. Franco's a legend, and he was legendary on the field, but I think his life off the field was as legendary. And he was just a all-around great person, beloved pillar of the Pittsburgh community. And so we're going to pay our respects to one of the rare players who was definitely a Hall of Famer on the field and a Hall of Fame person. So to start with, he was born March 7th, 1950, and it was at Fort Dix in New Jersey. And what it was his father was in the Army and his mother was from Italy. And I do believe his father was African American, his mother was Italian, and I guess they had met during the war or in the Army, and they came back to the United States, and Franco was born and raised in New Jersey. After that, he went to some school called Penn State. Boo hiss. And he played fullback. He did not play running back. He played fullback, but he was mainly blocking for a person named Lydell Mitchell. And Lydell Mitchell he was very good. Did he win a Heisman for them?
He did not win a Heisman, but I believe
he had a very successful career at Penn State.
He was the one projected to be like the NFL star, if I remember correctly, right?
Yeah, and he had a successful pro career with the Baltimore Colts. So he wasn't like he was a bust or anything. He was a very good running back. It's just I don't know why they put Franco at fullback, but they did. That was Joe Paterno's idea, so don't blame me. So in college, he had still solid numbers, 643 yards his first year starting. He had averaged around 600 yards and 1 year 10 touchdowns, 8 touchdowns, 6 touchdowns. So back then you got to remember they ran the ball a lot. Offenses didn't produce as much yardage, but so Franco comes out of college in 71, and 72 the Steelers are finally starting to come around. They're getting better. And 72 would really be the first year that they finally, Chuck Noll taken over in 69. It had been 2 or 3 years, and they'd been really bad the first year with Chuck Noll. But they had a quarterback. They had 2 quarterbacks, actually, Joe Gillum and Terry Bradshaw, and Terry Hanratty from Notre Dame. And they were building a defense. Chuck Noll was building. They had Mean Joe, and they were really starting to put together a team. And 72 was the year it all kind of came together finally for the Steelers, and that was the year they drafted Franco. And I think, I think I remember, people saying how key, some of the players were. They said, before we draft them, we never won. After we draft them, we never lost. So definitely, some good quotes there. So what would we say? What his most memorable play, obviously, was his rookie year. in the playoffs, the Steelers are down what 6-0, and some little play called the Immaculate Reception. Terry Bradshaw runs around with the chicken in his head cut off. There's a desperation pass that bounces definitely off of Jack Tatum, scooped up by the ball on his white horse, as Myron would later say, by Franco, and he runs into the touchdown for one of the most iconic plays in NFL and obviously Steeler history. And the Steelers win 7-6, and it's actually really the start of their dynasty, which is weird because they did not go on to win the Super Bowl in 72. They actually lost the next year to the next week to the Dolphins, who were in the midst of their undefeated season. And they actually, even the year after 73, I think they lost to the Raiders in the playoffs.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So everybody forgets about that 73 season. They put together a good year and made the playoffs, but they did not make it past a playoff game. So
yeah, and Steve, I think it was actually 7-6 Raiders, and then the Steelers with that touchdown.
Did I say 7-6? Okay, my bad.
13-7, but yes, it was. They were down. They were down to their last play either way.
Yeah,
and it
was 4th and 10. Yeah,
and that's a really good point. That like they didn't win a Super Bowl until 2 years later. And usually when you have a play like that launches a dynasty, like when the 49ers had like the Dwight Clark catch.
Yeah, they won the Super Bowl. Yeah.
Or even when the Ravens, when the Patriots had the tuck roll, they won the Super Bowl that year. So you're right. That's kind of one of those things that no one seems to really remember.
Well, it wasn't like the next year. It was like, oh, well, we didn't make it that year, but the next year we're right back at them. That was 73. Like everybody forgets about the 73 season. Yeah. Maybe we should cover that sometime. Like,
yeah. I wonder what happened that year. And like you said,
I know they lost to Oakland in Oakland, I do believe. So Oakland kind of got the revenge the next year.
And if the Steelers don't go on and win 4 Super Bowls, is that as remembered? You know what I mean? It's like, okay, they beat Oakland, but then Oakland beat them the next year, and so what, right? So yeah, you're right. That's an interesting way to look at that play.
Yeah, and so obviously the Immaculate Reception, we've covered that. But as for Franco, Super Bowl 9. So we go into the 74 season, and the Steelers have a great season. And I forget who they beat that season in the playoffs.
They beat the Buffalo Bills, and then they beat the Raiders in Oakland.
In Oakland.
In the AFC Championship game. Yeah.
So they had to play the Raiders 3 years in a row. You can see why that became such a rivalry.
They actually ended up playing them 5 years in a row when it was all said and done. Yeah.
Yeah, but at that point it was 3.
It was 3. Yeah.
And so now it's 1-1. This is kind of the rubber match, as they would say in baseball. So the Steelers beat them 2 out of 3 times, and this time it's to go to the Super Bowl. And so this time they do end up in the Super Bowl, and they play the Minnesota Vikings, and it's a real barn burner. Super Bowl 9. What's interesting is the Steelers did not have much of an offense in 1974, and actually Terry Bradshaw, I do believe, did not start as a starting quarterback till week 6.
Yeah, that's correct. Joe Gilliam.
Yeah, Joe Gilliam was in the first, but then he got hurt, and more importantly, he had some off the field issues. And that really changes the way things go. So that first Super Bowl, and even I've heard, other players talk about that on offense, was that first year was like give the ball to Franco and everybody block in front of him. So this is Franco's 3rd year in the league. And the Super Bowl 9, he has 158 yards on 34 carries. So, and that kind of carries the offense for them. It's really the story is the defense shutting down Fran Tarkenton. Dwight White, gets a safety on Tarkenton early. The score at halftime was 2-0, right? I do believe.
Yeah. It was 2-0 at halftime. That kind of was emblematic
of that game. It was a cold day, and they played it outside in New Orleans at Tulane Stadium. And it was hard to kick there. It was not like the greatest Super Bowl ever played, but Franco has a great game. He wins. They win. He wins. And other Super Bowl, he has other great Super Bowls. There was a play against Dallas in a later Super Bowl where I think I don't know if it was Hollywood Henderson or one of the guys like slams Terry Bradshaw down, and Terry said, Franco never really complained about not getting the ball or getting the ball. He said, I want the ball on the next play. The next play, he's like, I want the ball. And so, of course, he gives him the ball, and Franco goes for a touchdown. He was a clutch player and a good teammate, standing up for his quarterbacks there. He ends up winning 4 Super Bowls like the rest of that team, and has a very iconic career in Pittsburgh, very popular. There was actually one point, I think they were in what's it called? They were in Pasadena, and they got Frank Sinatra to come over because they had what had happened was a group of Italian fans kind of adopted Franco as the Italian army, and they had this whole thing. They would put like a curse on the other team. They had like the little bad juju thing. There's a whole NFL Films thing on it. It's pretty funny. He would put bad juju on the other team, and like they would bring like hoagies in the Three River Stadium and sneak wine in, and it was a whole wild thing. But the wildest thing they did was they got Frank Sinatra, who was of course Italian and famously Italian, I guess, to come over and say hi to Franco, and they gave him like a little helmet where it says Franco's Italian Army, just pretty all in good fun. And then they had like different divisions. They had like the Israeli division, like people would hang signs in Three River Stadium. It just really like a fan thing that people really got behind and had a lot of fun with.
Yeah, that was definitely like a sign of the times back then, kind of a thing. The way the Pittsburgh community kind of got behind him, and then had all those kind of themed kind of things where they had the Franco's Italian Army. And it's funny what you said about like bringing stuff into the stadium. You could never do that today, obviously.
Yeah, they literally have like a whole like almost like row inside the stadium. It's like stuff you couldn't do today for $100, Alex. Yes. It just sounds like a lot of fun. That's this is supposed to be fun, right, Tim? I think.
Well, I mean, ask the NFL because they don't often agree.
They're all about the money. And as for his Super Bowl career, he has for his 101 carries for 354 yards, he did score 4 touchdowns, and that's actually the second most in Super Bowl history. I'm not sure who has the most rushing yards, but I'm sure they're a really special person. But Franco, clutch when you needed it, good person off the field, and so there were, we'll get into some of the off the field stuff momentarily. But as for his career, he finished up his career in, was it 83? I think it was 83, and it kind of ended on a sour note, but we'll save that for later. He ended up with 12,120 yards, and that was a 12-year career. And at that point, he finished third all time when he retired. And he fell short of Jim Brown's record. And even to this day, he is still the 15th all time in NFL rushing yards. So, that's been over 30, 40 years since he finished playing, and that's still very solid. He made the Pro Bowl 6 times. I don't know if that really counts for anything. The Pro Bowl seems to be totally watered down anymore. So there, of course, is when in the final year of Franco's career, he held out for more money. That seemed to be like an issue in the 80s. The owners didn't want to pay. The players wanted more money. And so they held out, and Dan Rooney thought they had a deal. He tried to get Mel Blount to talk to Franco, but because Franco wouldn't practice. And Franco actually went to Noel's house, and they didn't even talk much. So I guess, Noel, being the people person that he was, just, didn't even try to negotiate at that point. And after that, Noel was very frustrated and gave the infamous, they asked, what are you going to do about Franco? And he said, Franco who? Which was, very, very kind of, off the cuff mark, but, it was kind of disrespectful, a fan favorite. And I think, people like my father who weren't a big Steeler fan, that kind of turned them off, the guy that had been loyal, he's asking, to get paid a little bit of money here, and you're going to just, if you don't want to pay him, that's fine, but you don't have to be like necessarily kind of rude. This guy did win you 4 Super Bowls here. You probably don't win all those Super Bowls without him. You definitely don't win Super Bowl 9 without Franco. So say what you want about the other ones.
Yeah, I don't know if Noel ever talked about it later, but I bet he regretted saying that. It just wasn't, yeah, like you said, disrespectful is probably the right word. And like back then, you didn't have any other leverage but to hold out because there was no free agency. Like
No.
once you were at the end of
No.
your contract, it wasn't like you could go to the highest bidder like you can today. That's really all you could do was say, man, if my current team won't pay me more money, then all I can really do is try to leverage for more. And and like you said, Steve, if the Steelers, I mean, at that point, 1983, what's that? His 12th season. He just completed his 12th
Yeah,
season.
if you don't want to pay him, I get it.
Yeah,
He is getting long in the tooth, and he went to Seattle, and he really didn't do much. Like
right,
he
right,
didn't need many yards to catch. Like I don't think he needed many yards to catch Jim Brown. I don't think, and he still didn't because
right.
he got hurt. He was getting hurt a lot.
Well,
Just all
how
this
many
stuff.
running backs play 12 seasons? Like
Yeah,
that's insane, especially for a physical guy like him.
yeah,
So if the Steelers didn't want to pay him and wanted to move on because they had younger guys like Frank Pollard and Walter Abercrombie, who was like a first round pick, again, totally get that. Like totally understand their position, but you don't have
yeah.
to
Just I think nowadays it would have been handled differently. It would have been like, well, we wish him well, and
yes.
we're just going to talk about the guys who are here and are.
Yeah, he's one of our all-time great players. We wish him nothing but the best.
Yeah,
Even like the Penguins have done sometimes, like the guy comes
yeah,
back and they'll play like a tribute on the
yeah.
scoreboard. Like why does it have to be, they have to why does there have to be animosity? And I just that was like Chuck Noll just being petty at that point. And I love Chuck Noll. He's great, all-time great, but that was not his best moment.
No, we all have our bad moments, and unfortunately, it was one of Chuck Noll's bad ones. Even like I'm trying to think of like when Willie Parker at the end of his career like left to go to Washington, and he even later I did read Willie Parker said, "Oh, that was a mistake. I should have just stayed in Pittsburgh." Like I don't like Mike Tomlin didn't get him to say, "Well, Willie Parker who?" or Willie Parker sucks. We're better without him. Like they welcome him back. I think I imagine he's been back with one of the
Sure.
Super Bowl teams. They never, and I guess the same thing happened with Franco. Franco always came back for all the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
He lived in Pittsburgh. He
Yeah.
never really left. So I mean, I don't know how hard, if there were any hard feelings. Maybe it's to attribute to the Franco's character that he just kind of let bygones be bygones and got over it.
The only other thing, Steve, that I can think that even remotely comes close to that was the Rod Woodson when Tom Donahoe had
Oh
a chance to
yeah,
bring Rod Woodson back, and he said, "We're not the Salvation Army," and that rubbed a lot of fans the wrong way. Also, because again, here's a guy that has done so much for your franchise, and if you don't want him back, just hey, like you said, great, all-time great. We wish him the best elsewhere. We're good at that position, whatever. But you don't have to like, but that even wasn't necessarily like a direct, like who's this? Who are you talking about? I don't even know who that guy is. I mean, the thing by Noel was just so harsh. So
yeah.
unfortunate, but like you said, I think everybody got over it pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think that's a tribute to Franco probably because
Hmm.
then you have Terry who always seems to hold a grudge against Chuck Noll. Depending, I mean, no, depends on what day of the week it is with Terry. He
Right,
could love him or hate him. He
right.
goes back and forth. So, but anywho, so Franco in 1984, like I said, played for Seattle, and there's a story of Art Rooney Sr., the chief, was at a family dinner, and I think he's the one who said we didn't win much for him, win much before he came, and after we never lost. He was really upset to see him play for Seattle. He was at a dinner and he was watching, watching Franco play, and he just didn't want to see Franco go out like that in a Seattle Seahawks. Is he the most famous Seattle Seahawk running back? More than Kurt Warner or Sean Alexander or whoever else to see. Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, they probably had a few that have done more in a Seahawks uniform than Franco did. I think you just named three of them.
Yeah, but and that was my list of Seattle running backs that I know.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty
Yeah,
good list.
yeah.
Sean
I
Alexander.
got Kurt Warner in there, which is pretty
Yeah,
impressive. He's a Penn State guy too, wasn't he? I
yeah.
think
He
so.
was
Yeah.
also very good
Yeah.
on the original Tecmo Bowl.
Well, yes, he was. Yeah. And it's not and it's weird that he has the same name as the other Kurt Warner. So
He was Kurt with a C though.
C, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kurt, not Kurt with a K.
Yep.
After his career, you know, Franco did all this great stuff, and it's like almost as epic and as Hall of Fame as his his playing career. So, like I said, Joe Gilliam was the quarterback for the first half of that season. Even Joe Gilliam in later interviews said he doesn't remember the Super Bowl because he was so messed up in his addictions. And you know what? He went and visited. Franco went and visited Joe Gilliam in Nashville and tried to support him and help him out and get him back, to sobriety. So, once again, this is a guy that didn't really play that long for the Steelers, but it's just a shame that Joe never did really get over them. But Franco, once again, the tribute to his character, caring for people more than just winning football. There's a story of when Mike Webster, if you remember Mike Webster, got really bad dementia and such from the concussions he had received playing. He actually, and I think Mike Webster really financially was in trouble later in life. He actually gave him just wrote him a check. Oh, here's $5,000, Mike.
Wow.
You need some help. So, now I mean this is maybe more controversial, but this kind of speaks to when Franco, and I think this kind of turned some people off on Franco. He was very loyal to Joe Paterno during the Jerry Sandusky scandal. And but I think he didn't think Paterno knew what was going on. And actually, and he was, people would say, well, there was no personal cost. It really was. Franco lost the sponsorship with the Meadows Casino over it. So I will say that when Franco believed in something, he was not afraid to just, stick with it and pay the consequences. And, right or wrong, he was loyal to Joe. And, you could debate whether Joe knew or how much Joe knew, or, how much more Joe should have done. But in Franco's case, he was loyal to the university and to Joe Paterno, the late Joe Paterno.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think that was probably not a great look for Franco.
Well, it hurt his image. It hurt his image for sure. I remember being annoyed with him for a little, but Franco's that type of person that I think his character, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If it was Antonio Brown, you'd be like, oh, here's another
Sure.
thing, Antonio Brown. But this guy, it's well, this is what he believed. You feel like it's a sincerely held belief, and he didn't think Joe was involved. Joe wasn't involved in the scandal. I don't think Joe tried to cover it up, but I don't. Maybe he should have called the media. Maybe he should have done something else. I don't know.
No, I think he should have done a lot more. But without getting into that, I think that yes.
Sticking to Franco, he was loyal, and it cost him. And once you were his friend, you were his friend for life.
That's exactly right. Joe Paterno was his mentor. Joe Paterno made him what he was. He wasn't going to turn his back on Joe. Now, did he need to come out and so publicly defend him, carrying around a cardboard cutout of Paterno and everything? That was a little over the top.
Wasn't he sitting in a box or something at one of the Penn State games, and he had a cardboard cutout? Because remember, they took away Joe Paterno's wins,
and they took down the statue too. And I think that's why he was carrying the cardboard. It's one thing to come out publicly and be like, look, all I know is that, this is a great man and blah, blah, blah. And I have nothing, but I'm never going to say anything bad about the man. Right. It's one thing to make a statement like that. But I think when he carried on and on like that, the reason I think it wasn't a good look is because you had real actual victims in this whole disgusting mess that happened at Penn State. And when you're making Joe Paterno into the victim, the way he kind of carried it on like that, it just, like I said, that wasn't a good look, because now you're basically saying, oh, I'm sorry, the victim was the guy that was in charge of the whole program. That's the victim in this, and that's why I think it was a bad look. But like you said, when you were Franco's friend, he was going to be loyal, and so you do have to admire that. And then Steve, I think you make a really good point too. Like, Franco had built up enough goodwill that yes, that wasn't a good look, and yes, I think, like you said, annoyed was probably the word with a lot of people. But also knowing Franco's character, understanding where his heart was coming from, you couldn't like hate him for that, right?
He waits. He throws the pass, and it's intercepted. George Polamalu at the 40, 35-30.
Steelers versus Ravens is the best rivalry in all of pro sports. And now that series has been chronicled in Pittsburgh versus Baltimore, the unofficial history, an all-new book from the Pittsburgh Sports Memories podcast. Relive all the fierce battles and exciting moments from this amazing rivalry. There were legendary plays like Troy Polamalu's pick six and the Immaculate extension, and there were crazy incidents like Joey Porter chasing Ray Lewis into the parking lot, or the Ravens putting a bounty on Hines Ward. We cover all of it, including some stories you may never have heard. Buy a copy for yourself, or get one as a Christmas gift for the Steelers fan in your life. Find it on Amazon, or see the link in the show description of this episode. And thanks for supporting the podcast.
Well, moving on to other things, he was heavily involved in philanthropy. He actually started a company called Super Bakery, which they actually sell this thing called the Super Donut, and I've actually had it. It's like for institutional use, and it's kind of interesting. You know, it's a frozen donut, and I didn't realize he had started that company until like I started researching it, and I was like, oh, I know what a Super Donut is. But Super Donuts aside, probably one of the most things that I remember this happening, but I'd forgotten until, you know, people had mentioned it. In 1997, do you remember where you were in 1997? You were probably in college, right?
I was in college.
Yeah. So you were in the city at this time. Do you remember when the KKK decided it was a great idea to stop parading around Tennessee and Georgia and bring it to Western Pennsylvania? Do you remember that?
I do. It was quite the controversy.
Well, it's like freedom of speech, and you know, even if we don't agree with it, you know, we gotta put up with it. And put up with is probably the best way to describe that kind of insanity. So the courts ruled that, you know, it is the First Amendment, and you are allowed to, you know, say speech that we don't like, even, you know. So they go down in front of the courthouse, and the KKK is going to have this big rally, and there's going to be all this fun racist crap going on that's just going to antagonize, you know, everybody and their brother. And so Franco, being the stand-up person he went down there before, because like they had like a big court ruling. The city had fought not to have it, but the city lost, and that I think that week or that day, like they hadn't come yet, like they hadn't set a date yet. Franco came and was gonna sit in. Like, have you ever been to the city council meeting? There's like that. There's the entrance, and then there's like this, like, I don't know what you would call it, like porch area. He was literally going to sit. He brought a book, a blanket, and everything. He was going to sit in that area and not let them come. And like, it was such a scandal. Like, the mayor came out, Mayor Murphy, like everybody's trying to talk him out of it. And I don't know. I want to say like the Steelers head of public relations came down and talked to him. And he just was so like, once again, like when Franco believed in something or was loyal to someone, he was not afraid. This is what impressed me. Like, a lot of people say a lot of stuff, but when times gets tough, like, oh, I'm out. Mm-hmm. This guy, money where his mouth is every time. You could count on it. And he went down there. And obviously Franco was biracial. And so, you know, and he had a placard when he was down there saying, keep America, you know, no to Nazis. And he actually had a personal, you know, stake in this, that his uncle on his mother's side had been killed in World War II by the Nazis. So he was no stranger to, you know, this type of racism, you know. And actually, so Dan Rooney came down to talk about of the sit-in and the compromise that, and then once again, this is like two of our like, it's hard to believe these guys were never elected, never any officials, but I would call Dan Rooney and Franco Harris two of our, civic leaders. Am I not wrong here, Tim?
Yeah, that's a good description.
Yeah, and they agreed to have a counter protest, which they did in Point State Park, and Franco went to that. So once again, like cooler heads prevailed, and Dan and Franco, had this counter protest. I remember the protest came. They had to put up fencing. The county police on horseback were there. It was a complete mess. I wasn't allowed to. I was going to go down there and just start a ruckus with the racist people, but my dad told me no, I wasn't allowed.
I think your dad probably made the right call there.
Yeah, I probably would have got myself arrested. I mean, because that's just, I don't know.
Also, I don't think you were going to convince anybody of anything.
No, I just would have made things worse. And violence with answering violence with violence is just creates more violence. Throwing a brick at a person like that might feel good for 30 seconds, but you're going to spend a couple days in jail probably for that. Which is what that was my plan. Was like, I don't know, but
you're gonna throw a brick. Wow.
I rarely wanted to. I was like, it's just go somewhere else. Go back to whatever hellhole you came from and leave my because it's like I lived in the city for all my life, and it's like these are my neighbors. These are people I live with, the people I interact with. And it's just not fair to them. They should be allowed to live here in peace and not be bothered by it. It's just because, they didn't choose to be this, that's just how it is. So there we go. That's the after school special part of our podcast.
Well, and yeah, I mean, like you said, such an emotionally charged thing. And so many people were upset, rightly so, that they were coming here. And, but like you said, like Franco wasn't like today, something like that happens and everybody's like, I got to do something. I'll log on to Twitter and I'll type out a tweet and I'll argue with other people.
No, he was going to go down there and literally sit in the freezing cold. I think this was in the summer, so maybe it wasn't cold, but still out in the cold with the bugs. And like he had like a little bit of protection from that roof area, but it was, he brought a book and everything. He was ready to go.
He was, yeah. And like you said before about the Paterno thing, like even if you don't agree with everything he did, and that one was, I think, one that everybody probably agreed with.
Yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer on that one.
But still, even if you didn't agree with his politics or his views on certain things, he was a person of principle, and I think that the world needs more people like that today, for sure.
It would be nice. It would be, instead of keyboard warriors. I guess it's easier to be a keyboard warrior.
Oh, it's very easy to be a keyboard warrior. You just type on your keyboard and then you clap back at people that disagree with you, and then you post a meme that supports your side, and then you go away happy, I guess. I don't know. I don't think those people are happy but that's what people tend to do. And then even people, like you said, that are elected to be civic leaders are often people that are out for personal gain more than they are for principle. So somebody like Franco and, like you said, Dan Rooney also, just, man, like I said, the world needs more people like that, regardless of whether you agreed with everything they said. The world just needs people who believe in what they say and then also are willing to stand up for those principles without, throwing bricks, for example.
Ill-advised. My how old I would have been, my 21-year-old self was thinking like a person that was 21. So. And my father was a little older and a little wiser and actually been to war. Knew that was a bad idea. So kudos to Dad there for steering me in the right direction. And kudos to Franco for steering us in the right direction, what? We can have our own protest and be positive, and welcome these people instead of being jerks.
Yeah. And that was actually a great idea, right? Yeah. Why not have a counter protest? And like you said, instead of countering, like you said, violence with violence, counter violence with love and show kind of a different side to that. So very cool.
So continues with Franco's legacy. There was always getting back on the field here, running out of bounds. This has been a thing I've heard a million times. It's mainly because Jim Brown criticized Franco in an interview for running out of bounds and not taking extra hits like Jim Brown did, who retired at the peak of his, whatever. To his defense, Ray Villapano, the Raiders linebacker, said anybody who said he was soft needs to go tackle him a few times. Franco actually, for his credit, said, once again, Franco being classy, he said, he was fine with what Jim Brown said. He said, he said if the Steelers needed short yardage, he got short yardage. Because normally, if you watch the runs he's run out of bounds, he's gotten like 15, 20 yards, or he's gotten the first down. It's like, so, do you really need that extra yard just to punish a defensive back or whatever, So, I guess that really wasn't his game, was just running people over. And that's probably why he played 12 years in the league and, other running backs didn't.
Yeah, that criticism was kind of ridiculous. Sports Illustrated years later, they did like an overrated, underrated issue, and they had like NFL running backs careers, and they said Franco's was overrated because he used to run out of bounds, and Freeman McNeil for the Jets, who very few people would put in the same class as like Franco. He was underrated, whatever. Like that, like I hate that kind of stuff. I hate the sort of like retconning a player's career because you decided later on, because I don't know if that was a big deal during his career, but it certainly was afterwards that he ran out of bounds. So it's like, well, yeah, and he played for 12 years. Like the Steelers got more out of him playing a long career than they would have of him gaining an extra yard here and there.
Yeah, and I think with your retconning, which I just had to look up because I didn't know what it meant. It's like revisionist history, I think we used to call it, back because I'm old. And it's just remember when the Steelers had that undefeated season going? It was that COVID year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And people would go back and do that. Like, well, they beat this team. They didn't have a quarterback. Well, this team sucked. Well, they beat that team because they were on a short week. And it's like, dude, what happened. No amount of, you trying to spin it. You're not adding, it's one thing to add context. It's one thing to try and, what would you say, belittle or make light of the achievement. And that seems to be, I think there's a difference between adding context and, basically trying to redefine what has happened. But
yeah, that's a good way to put it. And that's kind of what but remember, we're kind of now in the era of hot takes.
Yeah.
Right. And adding context doesn't get you clicks or attention.
Yeah. Well, I think George Orwell said it best. He who controls the past he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. So there you go. That's what they're doing. It's Orwellian. Saying Franco ran out of bounds is Orwellian. Maybe that was a little much, but
that's okay. Hey, I'll go with it.
A hot take. Speaking of hot takes, Joe Green said Franco was what Joe Green meant for the defense, Franco meant for the offense, and that's what Jack Ham had said. He said, it was the heart and soul and the person that all made it click. What other accomplishments? Steelers' first playoff win. He's definitely solely responsible for there. That's not first playoff win of the 1970s. That's first playoff win in team history. Correct? Yeah, that's it. There were before 1972. The Steelers had never won a playoff game.
Correct.
But anyway, back to that quote. Art Rooney, the Chief, said he was like the Battle of Midway. For historical reference, if you don't know, the Battle of Midway is the turning point in the Pacific War, World War II. Whereas like, you had Pearl Harbor, the Japanese are going to Coral Sea, Solomon Islands. They're winning all these battles. They literally have half the Pacific Ocean at this point. And if the Japanese would have won the Battle of Midway, right now, Tim and I would probably do our podcast in Japanese. But they didn't. And the United States basically won every battle after Midway to finally we decided to drop some sort of a big bomb on a couple of their cities and they cried uncle. So Franco, the same kind of thing. Like I said, before Franco arrived, the Steelers had not won a playoff game, really hadn't had very many winning seasons, nothing of any note. After Franco arrives, they win 4 Super Bowls. How many playoff games? Divisions, they win everything. Like, I don't think the Steelers had even outright won their division, even back when they just had the 2 divisions in the old NFL. So,
correct.
They had never had a losing season with him from 1972 to 1983, and they made the playoffs 10 times and won the Super Bowl 4 times. And just for more cultural impact on Pittsburgh, there's a statue at the airport, and the 3 people on the statues. Can you name the 2 other people besides Franco? This is how much we think of Franco, and this is just so fun.
Yeah, it's George Washington and Nellie Bly.
Nellie Bly, that's it. Yeah. So it's literally George Washington, the founder of the country, guy who fought the French and Indian War, all that good stuff in Western Pennsylvania. Nellie Bly and Franco Harris catching, and it's him action of him catching the Immaculate Reception. And unfortunately, they were all set up to have a great, retirement of Franco's number. And this was what, 2 years ago, year or 2 ago? Yeah.
It was on the 50th anniversary. So yeah, it was 2022.
Yeah. And Franco, unfortunately, it was a big week too. Like it was gonna be all Franco all the week. And unfortunately that week, Franco passed away very suddenly. No one, just weird. And, it was a very sad moment. Of course, the Steelers still did beat the Raiders in a last-second comeback in that game. So maybe the spirit of Franco helped us out there a little bit. But they retired his number, and with it, a legend passed, and somebody that is very influential in our community, not just on the field but off the field, and probably an example of a very good person that good to emulate. Good person to talk about. And I never really saw him play personally. I knew him more of after the fact. You could run into him. My father ran into him at least once or twice down on the north side. He was he was a member of the community. He was a Pittsburgher through and through. And God bless him for that. Any good Franco memories there, Tim?
Yeah, I was a little too young to really remember watching him play either. But like you said, he always, some guys retired and then you just never kind of hear from them again. Like Jack Lambert was one of those guys.
Yeah, I think he lives in Ohio, or I don't know.
Yeah, when was the last time you heard from Jack? And I think that's the way Jack Lambert wants it. It's not like anybody's dissing Jack
there's
Lambert.
No hard feelings.
Yeah, but Franco was one of those guys, and Franco wasn't on TV. Like Terry Bradshaw, you heard from for the next 40 years because he's on TV, he's in reality shows, he's in movies. But Franco was like you said, he was just part of Pittsburgh, and so he never really went away. And man, there's just so few people who are more respected in Pittsburgh sports history than Franco was, right? I mean, he's got to be like at the top of that list of just respect.
Yeah, I said outside of maybe Jerome Bettis or Mario Lemieux, or trying to think of somebody else. Clemente,
Joe Green.
Yeah.
Guys like that.
Yeah.
But again, it's a short list, really.
Yeah. It's just, just one of those pillars of the community, and good person all around. Well, that's it for Franco. We're going to thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoy our podcast, keep liking us. Keep tuning us in on all the podcast services you can listen to. Check us out on Facebook. We do a great job of posting stuff there. Hopefully we'll post more in the near future. I'm sure there'll be tons of fun stuff coming up there on Twitter and Instagram too. And thank you for tuning in, and God bless.